Logan Whitaker stole 28 packages, sold them online, and still had the audacity to wave at my camera like it was his fan base. His mom? Oh, she ran the HOA like a North Korean dictator in a pastel blazer. When the cops finally showed up, she screamed, "I am the HOA," as if that was going to stop handcuffs. And that's when I knew I wasn't just dealing with porch pirates. I was living inside a suburban cult. The sight of Logan Whitaker being shoved into the back of a patrol car while his mother screamed bloody murder on the front lawn is something I'll never forget. Karen Whitaker, dressed in her signature pastel pink power blazer and clutching her HOA badge like it was the Constitution itself, planted herself in front of Officer Ramirez and shrieked, "You can't do this! I am the HOA!" Her voice cracked with such force it sent a nearby squirrel sprinting across the street. Meanwhile, Logan, ever the smug prince of Crescent Ridge, turned his head over his shoulder and smirked at the crowd of stunned neighbors. "This is a joke," he scoffed. "My mom will have me out in 10 minutes. From their porches and behind their blinds, people who'd once feared speaking up were now openly watching, recording, and in a few cases, lightly clapping. It felt less like an arrest and more like a long overdue season finale. But to really understand how we got here, you need to rewind just a few weeks, back when I, Eli Monroe, thought I'd hit the suburban jackpot. I had just bought my dream home in the meticulously maintained, heavily rule-bound community of Crescent Ridge, a neighborhood nestled just north of Plano, Texas. Everything seemed perfect. Quiet streets, blooming flower beds, an HOA so committed to order that it published a seasonal color palette for door wreaths. I unpacked, painted the walls, and settled into what I thought was going to be a peaceful, low-drama life. But then the packages started disappearing. At first, I assumed it was on the shipping company's end. Maybe the driver was leaving things at the wrong address. I mean, this was one of the most secure, upscale HOAs in the area. Surely porch piracy wasn't a thing here, right? The third time it happened, something felt off. The tracking showed delivered, but my porch was completely empty. I did a walk around the neighborhood just in case it had been dropped next door. That's when I bumped into Mrs. Delgado, my next-door neighbor, who was watering her tulips like she was auditioning for a gardening commercial. When I mentioned the missing packages, her entire demeanor changed. Her eyes darted toward the corner house, the one with the perfectly manicured hedges, the pastel mailbox, and the massive flag that said HOA Proud. You didn't hear it from me," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder, "but you might want to check your camera and keep an eye on the Whitaker boy." That night, I ordered a Ring doorbell cam and mounted it before I even finished unpacking the box. 2 days later, I got a motion alert during lunch at work. I pulled out my phone and watched, dumbfounded, as Logan Whitaker, Karen's teenage son and alleged debate team captain, casually walked up my steps like he owned the place. He didn't even rush. He picked up the package with one hand, whistled a tune I couldn't place, and sauntered back down my driveway like he was picking up his Amazon Prime subscription. He even tossed a lazy wave at the camera before stepping out of frame. It wasn't just bold, it was a declaration. I watched that video 5 times in a row, each time feeling my blood pressure climb higher. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a kid who felt untouchable, who knew he was untouchable. I marched straight over to the Pink Fortress at the end of the block, phone in hand, video ready, prepared to have a civil, rational conversation. I figured once I showed Karen the footage, she'd apologize, discipline her son, maybe even return the package. But if I'd known what was about to come next, her denial, her threats, her weaponization of the HOA, I would have hit record before I even knocked on the door. If I'd have started filming the moment she opened the door, I might have captured what can only be described as a masterclass in suburban deflection. Karen Whitaker stood there with a crystal wine glass in one hand. It wasn't even noon, and an expression that said, "I was expecting praise, not problems." Her pastel blazer looked custom pressed, and her HOA badge shimmered just enough to catch the sunlight like some kind of suburban sheriff's star. "Well, hello, neighbor," she beamed with a voice coated in sweetener and condescension. The smile dropped the second I said stolen package and held up my phone. Her eyes narrowed, her lips puckered. "That's quite an accusation," she said, tone shifting into corporate HR mode. "Are you sure your camera isn't malfunctioning? Technology can be so unreliable these days." I stayed calm, mostly because I'd rehearsed this in my head 5 times. I explained that I'd recently installed a ring cam, that the timestamps matched the delivery, and that her son was clearly visible carrying my package off the porch. Karen didn't even look at the footage for more than 2 seconds before crossing her arms and giving me a rehearsed, icy glare. Logan is an honor student, captain of his debate team. He volunteers at the dog shelter. I hardly think he has time to steal bubble wrap and protein powder. Her tone dripped with sarcasm, but it was the next part that really stuck with me. And frankly, Mr. Monroe, I'd suggest you consider the kind of neighbor you want to be around here. False accusations can have consequences. HOA policy takes defamation very seriously. He smiled again, this time with teeth, and gently began closing the door. Message received. I walked back to my house stunned, not angry yet, but unsettled. It wasn't just the denial, it was the absolute confidence she had in her immunity, in her authority. Karen didn't even blink. And Logan, he was lounging on the porch swing behind her with earbuds in, eyes half closed, and not a care in the world. When he noticed me walking away, he pulled out one bud and mouthed, "Nice try." It was like I'd stepped into some alternate dimension where HOA titles granted royal immunity. The next morning, I found a folded note on my porch from the HOA board warning me about potential hostility toward community members and referencing Rule 3.1, maintaining neighborly conduct. It was signed, of course, by Karen Whitaker, president. Things escalated quickly after that. Logan began walking past my house daily, sometimes twice. He'd toss a basketball between his hands, whistle, sometimes just stare straight into my doorbell cam like he was posing for a senior portrait. A few days later, Mrs. Chin, 2 doors down, whispered to me in passing that her grandkid's birthday gift had gone missing too. "Don't say anything," she added quickly. Karen fined us last year because our Halloween decorations disrupted the neighborhood aesthetic. I started to realize this wasn't an isolated problem, it was a pattern, and worse, everyone seemed to be too afraid to do anything about it. Karen had turned the HOA into her personal fiefdom, and Logan was reaping the perks like a spoiled heir with diplomatic immunity. So I did what any mildly tech-savvy, fully irritated adult would do. I formed a group chat. Operation Porch Top. Just a handful of neighbors at first, me, Mrs. Chin, the Petersons, and Walt Henderson, the war vet across the street, who referred to Logan as that little porch gremlin. Within a week, we had 4 different camera angles showing Logan taking packages in broad daylight. One video even caught him opening a package mid-driveway, holding up a Bluetooth speaker and saying, "This one's actually cool." It was surreal. He wasn't just stealing, he was curating. We started gathering timestamps, product IDs, even linking up missing item reports. But even with all this, we knew confronting Karen again would go nowhere. We needed a new plan, something she couldn't HOA her way out of. And that's when I remembered something very important. Karen might run the neighborhood, but she doesn't run the law. It was that last thought, Karen doesn't run the law, that flipped the switch. I'd spent enough time dancing around her backyard politics and HOA threats. It was time to step out of her playbook and into something she couldn't manipulate, real authority. So I compiled everything, the videos, the chat logs from Operation Porch Top, the timestamps, even screenshots of Logan bragging about free gear on social media. I wanted this airtight. If Karen was going to go full courtroom drama, I'd bring the receipts, minus the HOA theater lighting. But just as I was prepping to submit everything to the local police, a new twist arrived, literally at my doorstep. One afternoon, I got home early from work and found a cardboard box, half open, slightly dented, sit in the middle of my lawn. It wasn't addressed to me. It was from Mrs. Patel, 4 houses down. Sitting on top was a sticky note that read, in messy Sharpie, "You're welcome, you're welcome." There was no doubt who the L was. It wasn't just arrogant, it was mocking. I picked up the package, walked it over to Mrs. Patel, and she looked like she was about to cry. "That was my daughter's insulin monitor," she whispered. "It was supposed to arrive 2 days ago. They said it was already delivered." That was the moment the story changed for me. It wasn't just annoying anymore. It wasn't about lost gadgets or Bluetooth speakers. This kid, protected by his HOA queen of a mother, was messing with people's health, people's lives. and the neighborhood was being held hostage by HOA technicalities and fear. I filed a formal police report that night. The woman at the front desk gave me a skeptical look until I showed her the footage. Her eyebrows lifted. "That's the Whitaker kid?" she asked. "You're the third person to ask about him this month." That was the crack in the dam. I was soon connected to Detective Ava Ramirez, a woman with the patience of a saint and the expression of someone who'd seen one too many bored rich kids try to outsmart the law. She reviewed everything in silence, occasionally raising an eyebrow at Logan's "this one's actually cool" line. "You've done half my job already," she said with a smirk. "We'll handle it from here." I expected the investigation to drag on, maybe a few weeks of back and forth, but Detective Ramirez moved fast. Within 48 hours, officers had already canvassed 3 houses and verified the stolen items. Even more interesting, they discovered Logan had been flipping some of the packages online under an alias, Lolo Prime TX. And it wasn't just neighborhood stuff. He had listings going back months: electronics, shoes, vitamins, even cookware. Karen's golden boy wasn't just a porch pirate. He was running a small-time black market out of her perfectly landscaped kingdom. What sealed it was when the police subpoenaed HOA meeting records and found that Karen had allegedly diverted HOA discretionary funds to host a Youth Leadership Appreciation Day, which was just a catered pool party for Logan and his buddies. That, according to Detective Ramirez, opened an entirely different can of worms. Fraud, misuse of HOA funds, obstruction. It was the kind of twist you couldn't script better if you tried. And the best part, she couldn't suppress, manipulate, or HOA her way out of real criminal evidence. But even with all that lined up, the real spectacle hadn't started yet, because the moment the squad car pulled up to the Whitaker's house, the entire neighborhood turned into a front row audience. It was surreal watching everything unfold, like the entire neighborhood had hit record on the same mental DVR. Word spread faster than wildfire. The Whitaker house was about to get a visitor in blue. People who normally wouldn't make eye contact at the mailbox were now peeking through curtains, phones in hand, popcorn quite literally in bowls. One guy across the street even rolled out a lawn chair and said, "This better be worth missing my pickle." When the squad car finally rolled down Crescent Ridge Drive, the entire block seemed to hold his breath. And when Logan was escorted out of his front door in handcuffs, wearing that smug varsity jacket with white taker stitched across the back, the gasps were audible. Karen, still in her HOA pink, came storming out like a banshee in heels, screaming, "This is a mistake. This is a vendetta. Do you know who I am?" "Yes, Karen, we all do." But what made it go from satisfying to poetic was how calm Detective Ramirez stayed. She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply recited the charges: theft, trafficking in stolen property, and organized retail crime. And as Logan was placed in the back seat, her voice remained as even as a GPS direction. "We'll be contacting your legal representatives, and no, HOA status doesn't override state law." Karen looked like someone had just told her yoga class was canceled forever. She pointed at me of all people, across the street and shouted, "This is your doing." I smiled and waved, mostly because, well, it was. The arrest triggered something none of us had expected: collective bravery. Suddenly, people who had whispered behind hedges were posting in the neighborhood Facebook group. Stories poured out. Unreturned packages, unjustified fines, mysteriously rejected paint color requests. One man said he was fined $150.00 because his garden gnome didn't conform to historical HOA guidelines. Another woman shared that Karen had once knocked on her door to complain about wind chime volume. The paranoia spell was broken, and like any good rebellion, it gained speed quickly. Mrs. Chin printed out a petition to remove Karen from the HOA board. Within 24 hours, it had over 90% of the neighborhood's signatures. Even the guy who never picked up after his dog signed with the note, "I'd rather deal with poop than Karen." But Karen didn't go down without a fight. She called for an emergency HOA security briefing on her front lawn the next day. No one showed up except her ex-husband, who stopped by to pick up his leaf blower. That didn't stop Karen from standing on her porch and reading a pre-written speech into a portable microphone. "We are being attacked by misinformation, jealousy, and a coordinated smear campaign," she declared to an audience of 0. Someone down the block blasted "Another One Bites the Dust" from their Bluetooth speaker. The timing was chef's kiss. Logan, meanwhile, wasn't just dealing with the legal fallout. After the judge denied his request for house arrest, He was ordered to complete 100 hours of community service specifically focused on property crime awareness. And guess who got to organize it? That's right. Detective Lemires assigned him to a local nonprofit where he'd be speaking to teens about the consequences of theft. I check. Karma, double check. But the final nail in Karen's pastel coffin hadn't been hammered in yet. That was coming from inside the house. Or more precisely, the HOA bylaws, because someone found a clause Karen herself had written that under certain conditions allowed for immediate board expulsion with enough documented votes. Guess who documented everything? It was almost poetic, Karen's own rule book turning against her. Clause 7.2 of the Crescent Ridge HOA Charter, drafted and proudly implemented by Karen herself 2 years ago, stated that any board member could be removed with overwhelming documented evidence of misconduct and 75% neighborhood consensus. She probably envisioned using it on people who dared to paint their fences taupe instead of beige. What she didn't expect was that someone like me would print out the entire clause, highlight it in neon yellow, and attach a thumb drive labeled Karen Receipts, Volume 1-3. When Mrs. Chin and I delivered the packet to the interim HOA liaison, an overworked real estate agent who looked like she hadn't blinked since 2009, she just nodded and said, "Y'all really came prepared." And we did. Alongside the petition signatures and the video files, we included screenshots of emails, timestamps from delivery services, even a spreadsheet Walt Henderson put together called Karen's Petty Wars, documenting every weird, fine, rule, or HOA newsletter quote she had weaponized over the past 5 years. One example, wreaths containing glitter are discouraged as they distract from uniform serenity. Another, residents shall not use lawn gnomes that depict facial expressions. It read less like community guidance and more like a satirical cult rulebook. But the spreadsheet and the receipts worked. The liaison scheduled a formal vote, and for the first time since anyone could remember, Crescent Ridge had an HOA meeting that felt more like a revolution than a bake sale. The vote was public, anonymous, and brutal. Out of 113 eligible households, 109 participated, 101 voted to remove Karen immediately, 3 abstained, 5 voted to keep her, though rumor has it one of those was her cat registered under a utilities bill. When the final tally was announced, the neighborhood Facebook group exploded. Someone photoshopped Karen's face onto the Wicked Witch of the West and added the caption, "Ding dong, the queen is gone." Another neighbor posted a gif of a pink blazer slowly burning to the sound of "Let It Go." Crescent Ridge hadn't just rejected her leadership, they turned her into suburban meme history. Karen, of course, didn't take the news quietly. She sent one last mass email to the entire community titled "A Sad Day for Standards" and signed it with disappointment, Karen Whitaker, former president, eternal advocate. The next morning, her flag was down. Her mailbox, once decorated with seasonal bows and HOA-approved flyers, was empty. By noon, a moving truck was parked in her driveway. She didn't speak to anyone as she left. Not a wave, not a glare, but Logan did. As he got into the passenger seat, he looked over at my house, rolled down the window, and muttered, "Nice win, old man." I smiled because that wasn't just a win, that was justice. Wrapped in bubble wrap. With Karen gone and the HOA under new leadership, Mr. Tran, who once got fined for having his hammock visible from the cul-de-sac, the neighborhood felt different, lighter. People started chatting again. Front lawns had personality. One neighbor even dared to paint their mailbox blue, and no one cared. Operation Porch Top disbanded not because it failed, but because it succeeded. The camera stayed up, but the fear didn't. I even saw Mrs. Delgado wearing a shirt that said, "Not today, Karen." But the best part, we weren't just neighbors anymore. We were a community that had survived a pastel dictatorship, and we were ready for the next chapter. Though, little did I know, one final surprise was still waiting in Logan's court hearing, and this one would make even Karen's glitter ban look subtle. I didn't expect to attend Logan Whitaker's sentencing, but when the county court clerk sent out a public notice, thanks to the number of victims listed on the docket, I figured showing up wasn't just appropriate, it was cathartic. The courtroom was packed, not just with residents of Crescent Ridge, but with people from nearby neighborhoods who had apparently heard the tale of Karen and her porch pirate. There was even a local journalist in the back row scribbling into a notebook. Logan sat at the defendant's table in a navy blazer that was clearly one size too big and a haircut that screamed, "My mom made me." Karen, meanwhile, was dressed like she was headed to a job interview in heaven. White suit, pearls, hair lacquered into suburban perfection. Her expression was a calculated blend of indignation and victimhood, like she still couldn't decide whether to cry or sue the county. When the judge, an older man with silver glasses and a glare that could strip paint, asked Logan if he understood the charges, the courtroom fell silent. "Yes, Your Honor," Logan said, trying to keep his voice even. The prosecutor listed the final tally: 28 verified counts of theft, 14 documented online resales, and unlawful profit exceeding $3,000.00. But it was the last charge that really landed. Organized retail crime. Barnes' jaw visibly clenched. She leaned over to whisper something to her attorney, but the judge shut it down immediately. "Mrs. Whitaker, you are not on trial today, but I would advise against turning this into a press conference." The gallery chuckled. Karen did not. Then came the testimonies. Walt Henderson stood up and recounted how Logan had stolen his heart medication during a record heat wave. Mrs. Patel broke down while describing the delay in her daughter's glucose monitor. Even quiet Mr. Tran shared how Logan had once stolen a grill thermometer and left a hot Cheeto in its place. Every word added weight to the air in that courtroom, like we were stacking bricks onto a house of consequence Logan never thought he'd have to live in. When the judge finally read the sentence, 8 months juvenile detention, 2 years probation, full restitution, and mandatory property crime awareness service, Karen let out an audible gasp. Not a sob, a gasp, as if someone had dropped a non-HOA approved lawn flamingo onto her soul. But it didn't stop there. The judge added one final condition. Logan would spend part of his community service assisting with a juvenile prevention outreach program, teaching at-risk teens about consequences using his own story. "It seems," the judge said dryly, "you have quite a bit of experience to draw from." That line made local headlines. Someone turned it into a T-shirt by the next weekend. And as Logan was led out of the courtroom, cuffs back on, he turned to Karen and said, just loud enough for the first few rows to hear, "Can I take off the blazer now?" Karen didn't answer. She was too busy staring at the floor, her carefully painted nails gripping the edge of her designer handbag like it was the last life vest on the Titanic. When the doors opened and people spilled into the hallway, it didn't feel like we had watched a sentencing. It felt like we had just ended a season of bad television and finally seen the villain get written off the script. Outside, Mr. Peterson handed me a printed photo of Karen yelling at the police with the caption, "Hail on arrival." Beneath it, someone had photoshopped Logan with a name tag reading Employee of the Month. I laughed harder than I should have. But after everything this neighborhood had endured, insults, fines, gaslighting, stolen gnomes, and insulin monitors, we'd earned that laugh. Crescent Ridge had finally found peace, or at least found a punchline. Peace, as it turned out, had a surprisingly festive soundtrack. Within a week of the sentencing, the neighborhood felt like it had collectively exhaled. Kids played freely again on sidewalks once patrolled by Karen's imaginary HOA drone squad. Porch decorations bloomed with chaotic creativity. One house even put up a 10-foot inflatable flamingo wearing sunglasses and a sash that read, "Karen can't stop us now." The HOA, under Mr. Tran, our new president and self-proclaimed chairman of Common Sense, rolled back about a dozen of Karen's more absurd policies. Lawn gnomes were officially legalized. Glitter wreaths were permitted with pride, and nobody got fined for wind chimes anymore, no matter how many times they played Bohemian Rhapsody. Logan, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen, at least not for the first few days. Then one morning, I looked out the window and nearly spit my coffee. There he was, wearing an orange safety vest and a look of pure existential despair, dragging a rake across Mr. Peterson's lawn. As part of his court-ordered service, Logan had been assigned to a community property program that happened to include several homes in Crescent Ridge. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Mr. Peterson, never one to miss an opportunity, gave Logan a handwritten list titled Today's Tasks, Karma Edition. It included things like scrub bird poop off the mailbox and repaint the lawn flamingo you once called stupid. Logan didn't complain, at least not out loud, but the deadpan look on his face said it all. The HOA prince had become the neighborhood intern. Karen, on the other hand, had gone full ghost mode. Her once immaculate house sat in eerie silence. The pink mailbox had been removed, the ridiculous "Hey Proud" flag taken down, and the seasonal front porch decor replaced with nothing, just a bare welcome mat and an aging potted fern that looked as defeated as its owner. The for sale sign arrived quietly on a Friday afternoon. No moving trucks, no goodbyes, not even a passive-aggressive farewell newsletter, just a listing that read, "Charming HOA home with leadership legacy, motivated seller." The irony almost knocked me off the porch. But Crescent Ridge wasn't going to let Karen fade into memory without a proper send-off. That Saturday, the neighborhood hosted a block party, not just to celebrate her exit, but to reclaim the community spirit she'd choked for years. We called it Freedom from the Blazer BBQ. Everyone pitched in. Walt brought his famous brisket, Mrs. Patel made mango lassi, and I smoked ribs with a dry rub I called ho-ha, no more. Even Mr. Tran got in on the joke, showing up in a pink bathrobe and mock HOA badge that read, "Dictator Emeritus, retired." A slideshow played on a projector, showcasing Karen's greatest hits, her most absurd finds, emails, and passive-aggressive HOA memos. The highlight? A slow moment zoom on the moment Karen screamed, "I am the OA," while Logan was being cuffed. We gave it a standing ovation. Near the end of the night, as people danced in the cul-de-sac under string lights and kids drew chalk outlines of Karen's crime scene, someone handed me a cold beer and said, "You know, Eli, we really owe you." I shook my head. "Nah," I replied. "We just needed one person to stand up. The rest, that was all you." And it was true. Crescent Ridge didn't just survive Karen. We outlasted her. What had started as frustration over stolen packages turned into something bigger. A neighborhood that finally remembered how to laugh, push back, and take care of its own. But just when I thought the HOA saga was over for good, a knock at my door the following week reminded me, every neighborhood has its secrets. The knock came on a Tuesday morning, just as I was about to take my first sip of coffee. I opened the door, half expecting it to be a neighbor returning my Tupperware from the BBQ, or maybe Logan with a rake in one hand and a look of soul-crushing regret in the other. Instead, standing on my porch was a woman in a sharp navy suit, holding a leather briefcase and a badge. "Mr. Monroe?" she asked, flipping the badge open with practiced precision. "Agent Halloran from the County Compliance Oversight Division. Mind if I come in?" I blinked. "We're not starting another HOA, are we?" She actually smiled at that. "No, sir. We're following up on a cluster of fraud reports related to misuse of homeowner association funds. And according to multiple statements and financial documents, your neighborhood has a rather colorful paper trail." She stepped inside and laid out what she'd found so far. Duplicate contractor invoices, youth programs that were really catered pool parties, and large payments from the HOA budget marked as community enhancements that turned out to be Karen's online personal shopping. Apparently, someone had traced multiple Venmo transfers from the HOA account to an eBay seller named BlizzGueen58. "Karen," I muttered. "Of course she'd make her username about her blazer." Agent Halloran chuckled, then slid over a folder thick with evidence. This wasn't just petty HOA drama. It might qualify as municipal-level fraud. She paused. "We're expanding this into a broader review of HOA governance across the county. Yours is just the tip of the pastel iceberg." That's when it hit me. What happened in Crescent Ridge wasn't just some isolated Karen-tastrophe. It was a blueprint, a warning, and a victory rolled into one. And apparently the authorities thought so too. By the end of the week, Agent Halloran had scheduled interviews with several former board members, requested HOE emails going back 5 years, and even subpoenaed financial records from Karen's time in office. The neighborhood buzzed again, but this time with a sense of justice, legal, official, unstoppable. Karen's exit hadn't just been karma. It was the beginning of a deeper reckoning. Crescent Ridge was no longer just a neighborhood. We'd become Exhibit A in a case study of what happens when petty power meets real resistance. Logan, to his credit, kept his head down and his rake moving. I'd occasionally catch him helping Mr. Peterson carry groceries or repainting a fence he once graffitied with the word lame. His court-mandated outreach program was in full swing, and rumor had it he gave a speech at a local high school titled, "How I Got Arrested and Still Had to Mow Lawns." Meanwhile, HOA meetings now included snacks, laughter, and zero references to gnome height restrictions. Miss Tran even brought a karaoke machine to the last one and sang "I Will Survive," dedicated, of course, to everyone who lived through the Blazer years. As for me, I finally ordered that Bluetooth speaker Logan once stole. When it arrived, I placed it on my porch, turned it on, and played the same song Detective Ramirez had humming in her cruiser the day she cuffed him. Another one bites the dust. The irony was delicious, and maybe that's the real takeaway here. For every Karen who thinks she's untouchable, there's a neighborhood full of people who've had enough, who document everything, and who know that one Ring camera and a little backbone go a long way. Crescent Ridge isn't perfect, but it's free of fear, free of pastel tyranny, and free to laugh again. And in the end, that's what community's really about. What started with a few missing packages turned into something far greater. A community learning how to stand up, speak out, and reclaim its voice. Crescent Ridge wasn't saved by superheroes or sweeping reform. It was saved by regular people who finally said enough. The truth is, power unchecked, whether it wears a government badge or a pastel blazer, can rot even the prettiest neighborhoods. But when everyday folks band together with patience, persistence, and just the right amount of sarcasm, even the loudest Karen can't outshout the truth. Justice doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it rings a doorbell, and smiles for the footage. If you've ever felt small against petty authority, remember, one neighbor with evidence is a nuisance, but 10 with receipts is a movement. Share your story, stand your ground, and if someone tells you that's just how it is around here, smile and remind them, not anymore.